Hey class, my name is Tyler Carlisle, and this is my PowerPoint for our term paper for ENVS 484 History of Energy, and it is titled, Is Climate Change Truly a Major Problem That We Can Solve in the Future? Let's see if we can get to the bottom of this. So this slide here is to not quote the Bible from a heavy stance of Christianity. It's to provide a quote that from the Bible that I've heard used for many decades by people who try to rationalize the destruction that we place upon the earth. And this quote goes like this: Man shall have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So this prophecy, which has been hardened into fact, now threatens our near-term survival on planet Earth. So pervasive are the human impacts on the planet at this point that it is said we live in a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene epoch, otherwise known as the Age of Man, at least for the moment anyways. And the pictures are just representations of maybe how we perceive the Garden of Eden to look like in our minds and what it's starting to resemble today. So this third slide here is a man named Guy Stewart Callender, and he published a journal in the Royal Meteorological Society in 1938 titled The Artificial Production of Carbon Dioxide and Its Influence on Temperature. This was an 85-year-old collection of data that was originally gathered in the early 1920s. He composed the data from 147 meteorological stations around the world at a time before computers logged it all, and it took him about 15 years to put this journal together. He used the laws of radiation together with absorptivity and wavelength data. He calculated the rate of temperature change attributed to CO2 to be roughly 0.003 degrees Celsius per year. He went on to publish many more papers of similar content in subsequent years. He also worked on one of the first ever geoengineering projects known as FIDO, which stands for Fog Investigation Dispersal Operations. His work was unsponsored and unsupported by his colleagues, as this is typical for groundbreaking research that takes place that challenges the status quo, certainly the industrialization of our nation, or the oil industry. So this slide here is talking about a 2.7 million year old ice core that was retrieved. Prior to that, the oldest ice core was about 1 million years old. The scientists will run these melted ice cores through various instruments like mass spectrometers or scanning electron microscopes to find pieces of pollution, sulfate, CO2, traces of metal, radioactive fallout, or natural aerosols like dust and volcanic ash. The findings reveal that, for the most part, CO2 hovered around 180 and 280 parts per million. The Earth has occasionally entered short periods of CO2 nearing 300 parts per million in this time structure. Even though this is less mentioned, the data still supports that. We are currently, though, entering an era where human-induced CO2 is reaching 420 parts per million, which is certainly the highest reading that we have recorded based on ice core samples. Now, we do have studies that have examined and analyzed the oxidation of micrometeorites found in 2.7 billion year old rock, moving forward to about 200 million year old sites. And the atmospheric concentrations of CO2 have been found to be as high as 1,800 parts per million, which is 4.5 times higher than today. And a few billion years ago, CO2 might have actually taken the place of nitrogen, consisting of around 70% of the atmosphere. This isn't very relevant to today's science, as we know very little about these periods of time this long ago. Is increasing levels of CO2 really the whole story? How much carbon dioxide is in our atmosphere? Answer: 0.04%, less than half of 1%. Nitrogen is around 78, oxygen is 20, and argon is a little less than 1. I gave the rest of the data on our atmospheric makeup because I felt it was worth mentioning. Current power paradigms are attempting to tear apart the world's economies based on less than half of 1%. The story of our destructive ways is far deeper than this, though, and far deeper than CO2. Very few would argue that we should not be attempting to lower CO2 levels. This is obvious, but this is only the beginning of the tale. We have waged war with this planet and its naturally belonging inhabitants with innumerable consequences. Man has attempted to have dominion over all for the reward of simply greed. Food for thought: The United States, Russia, UK, France, and China that we know of have detonated over 2,700 nuclear weapons on the surface, in the oceans, and underground. This this insanity of this act alone is mind-numbing. These are just the numbers that they have been publicly honest about. So why do we not take deforestation as serious an issue as CO2 from the transportation and energy sector? I'm just going to read a couple of these. Every second, a forest the size of a football field is cut down. Over 420 million hectares of forest have been lost since 1990. A hectare is roughly 2.5 acres. Through 2010 and 2019, approximately 9 million hectares of rainforest were destroyed every year over year. 137 different species of plants, animals, and birds are lost every single day due to global deforestation. 90% of people who live in extreme poverty depend on forests for their survival. And at our current rate, all rainforests will be gone in the next 77 years. And the U.S. has lost 973,000 square miles of forests between 2001 and 2019. How can we ever expect to solve our way out of a climate crisis by continuing to assault the planet's only means to repair herself? When we clear cut these trees, swamps, and estuaries, we are not just depending on fossil fuels to do this job. The tree itself, after being cut down, will then release the CO2 it has been storing into the atmosphere, and the same is said for the soil around that tree. You can then compound this equation by understanding that the tree will not regenerate in any reasonable amount of time that would offer any substantial assistance to the planet for healing or cleaning the air, storing carbon, and making oxygen, even if that tree is replanted in the first place. And when we are talking about these types of numbers, you can be assured that huge portions of deforestation are left unrehabilitated. Decarbonization by 2050 will stress larger populations that fall under a low socioeconomic status. This is another problem written through policy based upon populations to solve by spending more money than they need to keep for retirement and children, tightening the reins of a financial struggle that many are already enduring. Now, if you can afford these solar panels for your house or business, this is awesome and it's a great technology. But currently, most Americans can't pull together $1,000 in an emergency. So how could they possibly afford $15,000 to $30,000 solar panel installs? There have been talks that will drive incentive for residents to buy solar panels by raising the energy costs for those that have not bought into greener forms of energy. And this is not the case yet, but it certainly looks very viable for the near future. Environmental justice advocates speak to not leaving poor populations behind, but this is exactly what will take place under these new ventures for cleaner power. This slide is going to focus on the recyclability of solar panels, windmill blades, and EV battery packs for lithium ion battery packs. Currently, we can only recycle 1 to 2% of lithium ion battery packs for all EVs on the road around the world. The lifespan of solar panels is 25 to 30 years. The lifespan of windmill blades is 15 to 20 years. But after about 10 years, these blades and gearboxes are already needing to be replaced. This presents a huge problem for landfills, and in some instances, we're finding that they're burying these windmill blades after laying them flat and just trying to cover them up. Now, solar panels and EV battery packs, especially EV battery packs, are full of heavy metals and considered hazardous waste. They cannot be buried. They must be cared for very differently, and we do not have the facilities equipped to handle this amount of hazardous material efficiently. It is unlikely that any recovered material will make it back on your rooftop when you decide to upgrade your equipment. It is much cheaper to mine new material from third world countries with women and child labor, and you can see the Dominican Republic of Congo under cobalt mines for more on this subject. So now in 2023, we are currently proposing aerosol spraying into the atmosphere to cool the planet. First, this is completely contrary to cleaning the atmosphere or pulling out greenhouse gases by dumping hundreds of millions of tons of toxic man-made particles into the stratosphere to quote save the planet or cool the planet. This is going to lead to a host of environmental consequences that will not be fully comprehended for many decades. these proposals and methods that are being discussed can be researched under their scientific names known as stratospheric aerosol injection, SAI, solar radiation management, SRM, or stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, known as SAG. For the record, science refuses that these operations have ever been deployed in the past, and as a researcher, I can prove without a shred of doubt that these climate engineering operations have been in full stride for close to 45 years. Research and testing goes back 85 to 90 years. The general idea is to spray refractive particles to block the sunlight to cool the planet. Question: why push solar panels on one hand when you know in the background you will be creating hazy skies to block the sunlight? And the answer is they make money on both sides of that coin. I urge readers or viewers to search the 1978 United States Senate report, Weather Modification Programs, Problems, Policies, and Potential. This is a 800-page document put out 45 years ago that specifically addresses the United States efforts to spray various chemical compounds into the atmosphere to encourage precipitation, reduce precipitation, ocean fertilization, or create snowfall in certain regions. We cannot have a true and open climate change discussion without first acknowledging geoengineering programs being deployed by all major governments around the world. These are dangerous tactics, and they do not use weather balloons or fuel additives to perform these functions like it said to the public. If it was truly doing something good, we would have been informed about this 45 years ago. Now the activity cannot be stopped, and the repercussions are becoming too obvious to hide. My purpose here is simple: to any fellow student, providing awareness for those that are just seeing things that are not making sense anymore. Please take a look at the documents I've attached below to this slide. Playing God with the weather is a risky game, and if we don't become aware of this, there will never be any traction made in curbing climate change in any aspect or saving our planet for our children. There's another form of SAG that I mentioned earlier, and it's called ocean fertilization. It's been going on for over 45 years, which involves the nutrients being dumped into the upper layers of the ocean through dispersals of large aircraft to simulate phytoplankton activity through photosynthesis in an attempt to draw down an excess amount of atmospheric CO2 levels into the water, i.e. bringing down the heat. A cubic meter of seawater can contain as much as 4,000 times more heat energy than a cubic meter of air. How will this go long term is the question. Running our operations like this, largely opaque to the public eye for long periods of time, has been wreaking havoc, and we didn't even know it. We have forced and manipulated our oceans to absorb more CO2 faster than would naturally be possible in order to hide a collapsing biosphere around us. Now the oceans have heated up to a vast degree, providing 500 massive dead zones and ocean acidification. Not saying it's all from ocean fertilization. I'm saying that ocean fertilization has certainly not helped to provide our oceans with cooler temperatures. A BBC report in March said surface temperatures off the east coast of the North Atlantic were as much as 13.8 degrees Celsius higher than they were from 1981 to 2011 average. This is an inconceivable number, nearly 20 degrees Fahrenheit higher over the last 10 years than they were 30 years prior. Oceans are currently warming at the thermal energy equivalent rate of 7 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs per second. When the oceans are done absorbing this heat, what happens next? So in conclusion, I brought up Guy Stewart calendar at the beginning to address the concerns and data over rising CO2 levels through industrialization starting in 1938. Instead of trying to run tests on his information and confirming it or refuting it, his work was thus ridiculed for such hyperbole. Now, at this point, our attempts to mitigate climate change may feel like we're just changing seats on the Titanic. 50 and 60 years ago was our shot at getting the infrastructure and change tipped into the right direction. Now we need to consider, based on our materialization demands, what we can all start to live without. The overconsumption of the planet's natural resources has to stop. Same will be said for any form of geoengineering in the near future. We live in an endless, abundant conveniences in the first world nations, consuming 75% of all natural resources, while the other 3/4 of the world's population use the remaining 25%. Our way of life needs to drastically change across continents for this situation to even remotely become better. Our efforts to go green are certainly helping to drive an understanding that the situation needs continuous change and structure. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.